Through the entirety of the 2023 disc golf season, we saw Simon Lizotte absolutely obliterating the dimension, the MVP dimension, all over every course on the Disc Golf Pro Tour. And for the entire season, that was the driver he could trust and depend on the most. With the release of the time lapse, I'm really curious to see if Simon will use this as his main distance driver going into the 2024 disc golf season. And I'm sure a lot of you guys, after seeing Simon throw the dimension, wanted to support him, an MVP. You probably went and bought one for yourselves, and then you probably went and bought a time lapse for yourself and realized they're both just so overstable that us mere mortals can't really throw them very well. What I did was throw my time lapse into a brick wall 50 times. If you haven't seen that video, it's a few videos back from this one. But what I have is 3 time lapse or dimension alternatives that will help you get similar lines to Simon Lizotte. Now, I'm not saying you're going to throw as far as Simon, but what I am saying is you will be able to get similar shot shapes, a little more hyzer flippy, a little more turny, and a lot more distance. So we'll throw the time lapse first for comparison. Out of the box, this thing was nowhere near -1 turn, but after the brick wall excursion, this actually flies how a time lapse is supposed to fly now. So I'm actually quite happy with the time lapse at this point. Gets like a nice baby flip and then a nice controlled fade. It still doesn't carry super far due to its lack of dome. So I have an 11 speed and 2 14 speeds, maybe a 13 speed. But I want to feature today the Fission Photon, which at this current moment is my favorite MVP or Axiom distance driver. I think the Fission Photon is highly underrated and offers a ton of control combined with a ton of distance. And this is one of the most dependable and reliable and far flying 11 speeds on the disc golf market. This has been a disc that comes in and out of my bag very frequently, especially when the course features a lot of 350-foot holes on very tight lines. So courses where I need to keep the disc low, straight, and then have a nice controlled fade, whether I'm throwing backhand or forehand, this disc is super reliable and massively underrated. Let's give her a toss. We'll give her a better toss next time. The next disc that we're going to feature is one of the domiest MVP drivers. Very consistently, I find that the MVP relativity offers some of the most dome over any other MVP distance driver. And it features a -3 turn and a 1.5 fade. And I find that's probably a hair more stable than a -3 turn. But if you see the way Simon flips his time lapse, that's how you're going to be able to flip this relativity. It's a very nice flyer and goes very far. Getting a nice big turn, really pushing high speed turn. And I'm not sure if you guys could see it perfectly well. It's actually pretty far away. That was one of my furthest throws. It's up by the golf tee over there, which is at least, if not slightly more than 400 feet away. And I can pretty much commit to the idea that I'll never throw a time lapse 400 feet because they're just so dumpy and overstable. Now, the last disc I want to feature is the Tantrum. This disc offers more dome than any other MVP or Axiom disc that I've ever seen. Every Tantrum that I've ever seen features this really awesome pop top, slightly lower parting line. I find to be a hair more stable than the relativity, so you can really lean into it, not worry about it flipping too much, and throw it on super confident distance lines. And in my opinion, this is the closest flight characteristic that MVP or Axiom has to a destroyer. It goes far, and it's highly reliable. So that baby flip up and a very hard fade at the end, sure, but it carries so much farther than the time lapse due to its severe amount of dome. And although it is out of production, those guys are pretty easy to find on any reseller market or collector's page. So the time lapse is just right here. I'd say probably 340, 350. It's just short of this little slope coming up here. If you look all the way over here, about 30 to 40 feet farther was the Tantrum. And then almost to the bench is the relativity. And I think you guys are going to really like the relativity. But what I think is interesting, the time lapse flipped up and glid or glowed a little bit. You guys let me know which word is correct. And this one was on pure hyzer, and this one still went quite a bit farther. And that's the magic of dome. This is actually hype. I've never successfully thrown a disc from that flag to up here because there's a big hill that kind of comes up here. Maybe it's hard to see on camera, but I always wind up landing over here. So the fact that I completely cleared that hill and landed up here, absolutely huge. Let's throw everything going back. Again, starting with the time lapse, then the photon, then the relativity, and then the tantrum. I just think you guys will see a lot more success with some of these other discs. And I know it's so fun to try and replicate your favorite pro's bag, but at the end of the day, you're gonna have the most fun playing disc golf with discs that work for you and your arm speed. And you can still be like Simon and throw similar discs without having to struggle with a time lapse or a dimension. You can throw discs that'll suit your arm speed a heck of a lot more. But let's start off with the time lapse. You'll see how much this one turns a lot after the brick wall. It's that nice little flip up kind of dead straight line. That's the kind of line Simon was getting out of his first run time lapse. Like they weren't even flipping up and turning over. They were just like hyzer flipping and going straight and then fading, which was crazy how stable that run was. Then we've got the photon, which I'm going to go ahead and say that this is the people's time lapse. The fission photon is just a few ticks less stable, but still stable, and it's probably going to go farther than a time lapse for most MVP enjoyers. And it just flies on an absolute rope. And I just love that disc for controlled laser beam tee shots. And then we have the big boy, the relativity. Look at the dome on this guy. This thing absolutely flies for days. Look at that flight. Wouldn't you rather throw a disc that flies like that? I just hit the flag for the second time in my life. Thank you, relativity. Now we've got the tantrum, which I need to remember is actually a bit more stable than the relativity. I think I can just crush it on like flat / slight Annie. Watch this bad boy fly. And it has like the same reliable overstability of the time lapse, but on a similar line is going to go 50 to 75 feet farther. So to me, it's a no-brainer to throw the tantrum over the time lapse. All right, I'm actually having a super fun time throwing all these discs right now. But before I throw them one more time, I want to give a quick shout out to bergsdiscsports.com, the sponsor of today's video. You can use code ICE20 to save 20% on your pre-order on the V4. And if you own a disc golf shop or a store, or you want to buy a bunch to sell, we also offer wholesale prices. So you can find all of that and all that information on the bergsdiscsports.com website. But anyway, let's get back into the throwing. I'm actually loving how well throwing this into a brick wall did. It flies so much better than a brand new time lapse. I really got a hold of that one, I feel like. That's definitely my farthest time lapse throw. Now we've got fission photon, which is honestly probably the best 11 speed in MVP's lineup, like I said before. This thing just absolutely flies on a rope. It's so good. Even when you miss your line, time lapse, nice and flat, should get a little bit of turn. Look at that nice turn. I always get a bit more turn on my forehand than on my backhand. Then we've got photon, photon flick. Thing just flies on a rope. That's also really far. That's at least 450. Now we've got the relativity. might be too flippy for my forehand. Yeah, just a little too flippy for the flick. Maybe need to give it a little more height and aim kind of out there and let it get a full flex. Then we've got the tantrum. I think this guy's gonna go really far in the flick. Well, that was that was just weird. Once that thing got on Annie, it just stayed over. It was so stable on backhand, and then, I mean, I kind of yanked over on it, but that was really flippy on the forehand. But anyway, guys, comment your favorite MVP and Axiom driver down below. I'm gonna have to go with the Photon. I think the Photon is the people's time lapse. It's also available in fission plastic and in lighter weights. So I think the Photon, at the end of the day, is going to be that optimal disc for most players. But if you want a bit wider rim and a bit more overall distance potential, I think the Relativity is going to be a nice second option behind the Photon. And then if you're a collector and you just want a super domey, overstable bomber, if you do have that arm speed for the time lapse but wish it had more dome, the Tantrum is going to be that perfect option for the fast arm speed player that just wishes the time lapse had more dome. But anyway, I'll see you guys down in the comment section down below. Go check out bergsdiscsports.com, the Berg Sport V4, amazing bag. I also have a link to save money on Vessi's down below, and Disc Golf Deals USA. Go support all my sponsors, helps support the channel immensely. I'll see you guys in the next video. Doing a video every day all the way through December, and take care.